My name is Leonard Stanek. Call me Lenny. I was born in Austin, Minnesota, and I moved to Elberly when I was 8, and I'm still in Elberly, so I've lived there for 72 years. All my relation on the Stanek side lived in Austin. They had 11 children. And my mom's side of the family lived in Manchester, Minnesota, and they had 11 children. I grew up around Elberly here on the city because we were living in an apartment above one of the restaurants here, Home Cafe, and so I know this area pretty good. So I've been here for many years. I live now on Maurice Avenue in Elberly. I have 5 children and my wife of 58 years.
What year did you graduate?
I didn't graduate. I quit school. Me and 3 buddies quit school and enlisted in the Marine Corps. And that was 1952, October. And we went through boot camp in Camp Pendleton, California, and tent camp in Camp Pendleton, California. No, I was in boot camp in San Diego, California. I'm sorry. And then I went to Camp Pendleton for more training to be a combat Marine. And so I volunteered to go to Korea, and they needed some guys. We were getting, a lot of Marines were getting killed and wounded over there, so I volunteered to go.
So what was the date that you enlisted?
I enlisted in October of '52, and I stayed 3 years. I left the Marine Corps in 1955. I had a 3-year stint.
So why did you choose to enlist, and why did you choose the Marines?
Well, I had 2 uncles in the Marines, and my my grandparents in Austin, with so many of them, 8 family members there, and I'd stay there in the summertime from 1943. I'd go over to Austin from Albert Lea, and I would stay with my grandpa and grandma and uncle, and the rest are all in the war or in Washington D.C. And I remember the Second World War very much because with so many of my uncles and aunts in the Second World War, I can remember we had a flag or a pennant in the window of our home in Austin, and it had 8 stars in it. And when Roosevelt used to speak in the evenings over there, I could walk down the street and I'd hear President Roosevelt speaking. At that time, there was no TV, no air conditioning, so everybody had their windows open, and it was kind of neat to walk down the street and see all the stars. Almost every house had a star or 2, and then I'd come home and there'd be 8, and so I was kind of proud of that, and that's kind of why I enlisted in the Marine Corps. The stars represented each person that your family had a serviceman in the Second World War. You got 1 star, and then if somebody got killed, then the star was gold. But otherwise, they were white, and they all come home safely. They all got home, even though they were in some big battles.
So can you tell me a little bit more about your family who served?
My dad served in the Merchant Marines. My Aunt Helen served in the Army, and she was secretary for Eisenhower. And she went to a lot of countries, Europe, England, all of them. She's got some pretty good stories to tell about it. My other aunt was in the Second World War. She was a wave. Then I had an aunt that didn't go into service, but she was a member of the Washington, D.C. She was some kind of worked for the War Department, but she wasn't in the service. And then I had two uncles that were Marines. One was on the battleship Bunker Hill, and that got they had a Zero come in and hit the ship. And I think there was like 200 and some people, Navy and Marines killed in that. And it was an aircraft carrier. And then my other uncle, he was on Iwo Jima and all of the islands. He got wounded 3 times. And he was a good Marine, and so was my other uncle. And then we had 3 in the Army. And one of the uncles that was ended up in the Army. He went in the Marine Corps, and we've never found out why. But then he got out of the Marine Corps, and he enlisted in the Army. So we've never been able to figure that out, why that was. So that's about it. But they all come home safe, which is really great. And the day the war ended, I happened to be in Austin. That was in August 1945. And I was by this bridge on the east side of Austin. And the whistle from Hormel started blowing, and it just kept blowing. And the churches started ringing their bells, and Queen Angel's Church was real close to where I was, and then all the cooks and the waitresses, and it was in the afternoon, about 2 or 3, and they all come out of the Rosie's bar, and there was a little restaurant there, and everybody come out, and they all started hugging and dancing and hollering. So it was a pretty special day. Okay.
So when you were in training for the Marines, can you tell me a little bit about that training? What was it like?
It was 13 weeks, and I was in a camp in San Diego. A lot of marching with the band, John Philip Sousa's band. And I hear that, I always think of Camp San Diego, because you marched for discipline reasons. You marched 3-4 times a day, and through rifle training, I was a marksman, or sharpshooter, whatever you want, the highest medal you could get. Then after boot camp, we got after 13 weeks, we got Liberty. We got to come home to Elberly. And then I went back to Camp Pendleton, and they trained me some more for the Korean War.
So why did you choose to volunteer for Korea?
Just for family. I don't know. It was kind of like a tradition with 8 uncles and aunts and dad in the service. And my stepdad was in the service too, so that was very interesting too. He was in the Army and got a bronze medal, and so did some of the Staneks, got some bronze medals too. The Second World War was special.
So then, when did you head over to Korea? What was the date?
We went over on a ship. I'm not sure what the date was, but I got there at Incheon Harbor, and I was just turned 18 years old on January 22nd, and I could hear the guns going off and the shells going off maybe 35 miles away or so. Incheon was already secure, so there wasn't any North Koreans or Chinese there, but I could hear the guns going off, and I thought, God, I'm 18 years old. I'd be in school, high school, and here I am hearing them shots going off, and then I kind of wondered, did I make the right decision? But I wasn't scared, but I got sent off to the front lines for the first 2 weeks I was in there. And then they brought us, we got relieved, or they had one of them truces where they would pull back and they would talk on I can't remember, Panmunjom is where the Koreans, Chinese, and the United States and all the other countries that were with us in the Korean War. And I can't remember which one, but we fell back, and that's where we got the hot meals. Otherwise, front lines, you had sea rations. And one of my favorite sea ration was Spam and eggs, and then you got a little cookie, a little cracker with it. And that was my best meal as far as on front lines was the sea rations.
What unit were you a part of?
I was with the Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division. And it was a pretty good outfit. I read a couple stories in the magazines, the Legion magazine, VFW magazine, and I also have a couple books on the Korean War. And before I got there, the Easy Company was in quite a few battles, and so I was a replacement for some of the ones that were killed, and some that were wounded so bad they sent them back.
So when you were on the front lines, what were your duties?
I was a leader, squad leader. I was a corporal. And in the Marine Corps, the private is a low guy, and the private first class is a second, and then the corporal is a third, and he usually has a squad of 11 men, and I was a squad leader in Korea.
So what did that look like on a daily basis?
Most of the time you were in a trench in the front lines. Sea rations for food. We were I was in like 3 battles, and one was I was there, and they had sent us up to the front lines, and we were gonna help the it was Dog Company, I think, or another Marine unit. We were going to help them. They were having trouble, and I'm not sure which hill it was, East Berlin or Berlin. It was a big hill, and we were getting ready to go up and help the Marines that were on there. The Chinese were fighting our Marines, trying to take the hill back over. And we were just kind of waiting to have the lieutenant or the captains to tell us to go up the hill. And one of the lieutenants come by and said to me, Corporal Stanek, you better dig in a little deeper, because they'd told us to dig to get lower. And he says the 16 inchers are coming in. Well, I never heard 16 inches. I heard 60s and the 81s, and 120s, and then I heard this, and he could come back around to me again, and there was 4 or 5 of us sitting on the ground, and he says, "You better dig in deeper than that. These are 16 inches." And then they come over, and I could hear them coming, zzz, and they were trying to hit the Chinese that were trying to take the hill. So I did dig in a little deeper when I heard them going over, because they were big. The 16 inchers come from a ship battleship in Incheon Harbor.
So it was the U.S. firing, and it was coming over your head?
Yeah, coming over our head to keep the Chinese from coming up the hill. And what was really interesting about that time was that the armistice had been one time before since I was in Korea, and we were just ready to go up the hill, and I think I was like the 3rd guy going up, and they said, "Don't stop, keep going. We got to get up there and help the other Marines." And then all of a sudden they says, "Hold it, we're not going to do it. There's an armistice." So I went back down, and we went back about maybe 1,000 yards, and here come this corpsman that was a good friend of mine from Wisconsin. Well, not a good friend, but he was an acquaintance, one of the first guys I met when we were back in the safe area. And I said, "Doc, what's going on?" And he says, and there was a black Marine sitting on a rock, and his leg had been all mangled, and the doctor was shooting painkillers into him. And I looked at him and I says, "Well, is a helicopter coming to pick up the Marine?" And he says, "Yeah." And I says, "Well, you got to get some clean clothes on." He was covered in blood and flies, and the ants were on him. And he says, "No, I got 2 more guys to bring back from up there." And that was the last time I seen him. He was mostly used with the other company until the 26th. And I've heard since that he was killed, but I'm not sure. I read it in a magazine, and I think it's him, but I'm not exactly sure. And so we went back, but we stayed on the DMZ line, and then on that was like in July 10th, and the war was over on July 28th. But on the 26th, the Chinese were sending mortars over and I could hear them coming, and because they did it before many times before, but I could hear them coming, and they kept coming closer and closer. So I got way down in the trench, and the trench was here, and then we had a foxhole type thing where we had clear vision of if they came. And the last one I didn't hear, it hit me in the head, a piece of shrapnel, and went through my helmet. And I maybe blacked out, but it wasn't very long, because I rolled out into the trench, and I could smell the gunpowder, and I looked around, and here come Joe Bloom. Now, Joe was a gung-ho Marine. He wanted medals. I mean, one thing about him, you knew he wasn't going to leave you. Well, no Marine would leave another Marine, but Joe was different, and I used to, he'd go get a sniper rifle and ask me to use the binoculars to spot for him. And he seen me laying in the trench line, and then all of a sudden I could feel something warm on my arm, and it was blood coming down from my wound. And he says, "What happened?" And I says, I don't know, but I got hit with shrapnel." And he says, "You lucky son of a gun, you got a Purple Heart." And so I always remember that. And then he says, "I'm going to take your spot here." He says, "You can get back to the CP, okay?" And I says, "Yeah, I can make it back there." And he says, "You think they're coming?" And I says, "Well, that's usually their pattern, because they would send mortar rounds in first, and then they would come." So I says, "Yeah, well, I'm taking your spot," he says. So I went back to the aid bunker. I don't know if I crawled or walked or how I got there, but anyway, the captain was there, and some corpsman, but it wasn't the doc that I knew, and they put bandages around my head, and there was 6 other people that had got wounded, and they were bringing. They only had one Jeep to carry only 2 people at a time. So I heard the captain say, "We can't take all 7 of you." He says, "We're going to have to take 2." And I said, "Well, I'll stay back." Because I wasn't really, I wasn't knocked out or nothing. Maybe a concussion. And I said, "Well, I'll stay back." And he says, "No, you got a head wound." And so then I was one of the first 2 to get left. And then I went by Jeep, and then I went on a helicopter, and they took me to hospital ship Haven. And I was there about a week, and then they asked me if I wanted to go to Japan or back to a MASH unit, and I said, "I'll go back to the MASH unit." And then I just happened to be, my company was right above where the MASH unit was, and so I stayed there about 3 days, and then I said, "Well, I can come back anytime." So I went back with my old unit, and then I got sent to the MPs, so I was an MP for the rest of the time in Korea. So that's about. I got a picture. I got to go to a Bob Hope show, and I got a picture of Marilyn Monroe in a Jeep, and so I always thought that was pretty neat. And my best friend, he's been my best friend since he was 8 years old. We've been buddies for 72 years, and he went in the Marine Corps with me. And he got over there after the war, and so I always told him that that's why the war ended, because they knew you were coming. And but he's my best friend. 72 years we've been friends.
So the July 26th, what hill was that?
It wasn't a hill. We were just defending a trench line where the part of the DMZ, and I'm not even sure what. I don't think it was a hill. Because we just left the 3 hills that I remember. They don't really tell unless you're like a staff sergeant or officer. they don't really tell you, all they do is tell you where to go and what to do. And so you don't always, actually, I heard of Vegas and I heard of East Berlin, but by reading a book that about the Marines in Korea, I learned that was my unit, and they were on these certain hills. But other than that, you really don't know. You just follow orders, and so.
So can you tell me any other memories or stories that you have of that time?
After the war was over, I got sent to the MPs, and my best friend wrote me a letter, and told me that he was going to be in Korea, and he was only about maybe 8 miles away from me at where the MPs were. There was a Marine brig there too, but I never did have anything to do with the brig, and I just drove around in a Jeep, MP Jeep, and so he told me to come over and see him. So the first time I went over there was on a Sunday. I just borrowed the Jeep from the MPs and went over there on a Sunday. And they had steak and eggs for breakfast. This was a Korean Marine unit. Officers were and the Marines were Marines, but they taught the Korean Marines how to use mortars. And so my buddy, he would drive the captains and colonels and lieutenants around and take them wherever they wanted to go. So when I went over there on that Sunday, well, here they had steak and eggs for breakfast from 6 o'clock in the morning until noon, and then they had soup and sandwiches after that. You could go anytime you wanted. Well, the difference between that place and us was that the lieutenants, the service or the officers always ate in one spot, and the enlisted men, they ate in another spot. And of course, their food was always a lot better than ours. And so I thought that was pretty neat. So every Sunday, then I'd volunteer to be on duty for 8 hours, and go over, and I'd stop when I needed an hour or so of rest. I'd stop and go have breakfast with it, or lunch in the afternoon. So that was pretty neat.
So can you tell me more about the MP role? What were your duties?
My duties were just to drive around an MP Jeep and check out, make sure there was no Marines going into villages for whatever reason. They would do that, and they weren't supposed to. That was off limits, and unless they had a credentials, they couldn't even be in the village. So, and then I just drove around, and I was give tickets out if needed. I never needed to write one, so I was maybe I wasn't doing my job as good as I should have, but I enjoyed being in I had my choice of going to Washington, D.C. when I went back to the States, or going to Camp Pendleton. I volunteered to go Camp Pendleton, and they put me in a test unit. They called it a test unit, and the Vietnam War had all the helicopters bringing men in. That's what we were doing, training to do, and to learn how to do that. And then they would teach other Army and Marines to do it in Vietnam. And I also got to be in an atomic bomb test in Yucca Flats, Nevada. It's about 75 miles west of Vegas, and so they had a atomic bomb on a I don't know, high 500-foot tower, and we were in a trench and told not to look up. And we did have glasses, or some dark glasses. And when the bomb went off, the trench went like this here. And then all the sand just come flying. They announced, look up, you can look at the atomic bomb now. And so then we did some maneuvers there. And next day we went back to Camp Pendleton, California. So that was kind of interesting.
So, where were you the day that the armistice was signed?
I was in hospital ship Haven when the treaty was signed. Yes.
And how did you hear the news?
I think it was a day later than the actual 28th. And reason I'm saying that is even though I really never blacked out or anything when I got wounded, when I got on the hospital ship, I don't know if I had a concussion or I was just plain tired, but I slept for quite a while. And that's when I woke up, and I think it was probably the 29th or the 30th of July that I found out that the war was over.
And what was your reaction?
Oh, I felt good, but it was a good feeling to know. But we had at least 2 or maybe 3 armistices that didn't work out, or peace talks, and we would fall back from the front lines, and then we'd have to retake them again. So it didn't make a lot of sense, but I guess it did, because the war did end on July 28th.
And what did it feel like just following the signing of the armistice? What was the atmosphere like?
I don't know. I was on the hospital ship Haven, so I really don't remember any of that.
The days just following the signing of the armistice, when you rejoined your unit, right? It was shortly after.
Yes, about a week, maybe a week and a half. Then
what was it like?
Oh, to see my friends? It was real neat, but I never did find. I didn't see the corpsman, but he was always with 2 different companies, Easy Company and Dog Company, and so I never really. When I went back to my unit, I didn't get to see him, and nobody told me about it, and about 55 years later, I read in either it was a VFW or Legion magazine, or a book that I got about the Korean War that he might have been killed when he went back up on that hill to get some more wounded out.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what were your specific duties when you were on the front lines?
Mostly to my 11 Marines that were under me, to stick with them, make sure that they got the orders that I got, and to make sure that nobody was ever left behind.
What kind of friendships or camaraderie did you form during that time?
I haven't got Joseph Beal from California came one day on a train, and I met him down there, and he could only stay a day and a half, and so we visited, had a good time for 2 days, and then he went back to California. I haven't been able to keep in touch with him or any of the other guys. I've tried a couple times to get a hold of them, but I've never been able to. I did get hold of two guys that were in the same A-bomb test that I was in. One was from California, and one is from over in western Minnesota. In fact, I just talked on the phone to the guy from he was a farmer over in western Minnesota. And the other guy from California, him and his wife do that line dancing. And they were going to have doings up in the cities. And these people spend money, lots of money, to go all over the country, Vegas, New York. And he went up to the city, so I went up and met him and his wife, and we talked about the time we had together. And so that was kind of interesting. They were good dancers. Me and my wife didn't. We danced, but not that kind.
What was the date that you rotated home from Korea?
It would have been in March of 1954, and we came home in a ship. They sent us home. We went over in a ship and came home on the ship. I landed in San Francisco. First thing I did was have a big steak and milk, because milk was in Korea was powdered, and so instead of even having a beer, I had milk.
And what was your date of discharge?
I think it was like the 7th of October 1955. That would have been my 3 years that I spent in the Marine Corps. It's great. I really liked the Marines, but I don't know why I didn't enlist. But I didn't re-up.
And what have you done since then?
I was worked at the meat packing plant. I worked for the railroad as a switchman, they called them, for about a year, and then I went to Wilson's, and I worked there for 20 years in the plant, and then I was a union member of Local 6, and they appointed me a business agent for Local 6. So I was with them for 15 years, and my time went with the, so I had 35 years at Wilson instead of 20. So, and I enjoyed a lot of good friends at Wilson's. You really make good friends, kind of like in the Marine Corps. You know they'll always be right with you and never leave you behind.
What do you feel like impacted you the most from your Marine service?
Oh, the friendships. It's just unbelievable how you get to know them, and you know they'll always be right there with you and never leave you behind. And the guys at Wilson's, most of the time you work on a line, and you know, some days you didn't feel good, some days you have problems, and they would help pick you up. You know, couldn't get the right cuts or something, they'd help you out, but you never took advantage of them, or otherwise you were in trouble. So, and I was on the safety committee at the plant and made sure that everything was safe for the workers as much as I could. And I'd walk around the plant with the OSHA when they'd come into Elberly, the Wilson plant. Had a good time, a lot of good friends. And my best friend, Arlie, he worked there too, and then he went with me, or I went with him as a business agent for the local too. So we grew up together, and we did everything together, Marine Corps, life, married girlfriends who knew each other. So had a great life. I really enjoyed my 80 years.
What kind of lessons do you feel like you learned through your military service?
Oh, discipline is the biggest thing. Do what they tell you, and always, do what's right. Learn, a lot of good habits. There was a lot of habits you could go the wrong way, but it just taught you, And when I was MPs in the Marines in Korea, we had a brig there where they put you in a brig if you do something wrong. And that kind of helped me know that I never wanted to ever be in jail or a brig or anything like that. So it really taught you a lot of good things. Good. Military is very good for your son or daughter to go into.
Do you have a message or a piece of advice that you could give to younger generations?
Yes. Always treat the servicemen and if called upon to go. I'm a little disappointed in everybody's being called a hero now. I think a hero is something special, and if you call everybody a hero, it's kind of brings down the people that were really, like in 9/11, those people that stayed there and helped bring people down, and I was retired at the time, and I got to see it, and seeing those policemen and them firemen going up them stairs, knowing that they probably weren't going to come back down. Them are the heroes. I think it's nice that the people that go into service are thanked by people. They come by and say thanks for your service if they know you were in the service. But I'm a little disappointed in the hero, everybody. If you join the service, you're a hero. I just don't think that's exactly right. My own feeling.
So what is Korea to you now?
It's kind of weird because I know there's 40,000 or something over there, and I know that North Korea is still communist, and they have an atomic bomb, which bothers me. But I don't know how to change things when the leaders don't want to change, when the North Koreans don't want to change, and I always wonder if the Chinese will come back and help them. If they get in a fight with us again. I was lucky. I happened to, in 1959, I happened to get a new friend that moved to town, and he was in the Army, and he played basketball and softball, and our wives and children all grew up together, and he just passed away last year. But he was he got caught in the Chosin Reservoir, and he was captured. He spent 3 winters in a concentration camp, and I always looked up to him and thought, how hard is that? But he was one of the nicest, most fun guys to go out. If you were going out, have a beer with him or something, that you were going to have a good time, because he could tease the girls in nice ways, not bad that they thought but I just had a wonderful time with him, and as many times I was with him, thousands. We never talked about the Korean War. And then when we got, when he got retired about 7 years ago, he started coming to my house and visiting me before he went to California for winter. And he'd stop when he come back. And he did tell me some stories about Korea and when he was in the concentration camp. But it's really hard to believe that you could live through that, taking your buddies out dead almost every day. 1 or 2 died, he told me. But we never talked about it until about 6 years ago, and he died last year. He told me how he escaped one time, which is very interesting. They had it planned as 5 of them were going to escape. So all the other prisoners, they were by a river. And so the guards and the guys started skipping rocks. They did this often, I guess. I don't know why. I suppose something to do. And the guards were watching them, so they always watched them skip these rocks. And so while the guards were watching them skip, these 5 guys went across the river. And he said one of them was killed and one was wounded. And 3 of them got through. And they were there about 3 days. But when you get in North Korea, there's no villages. You can't go to a village and get any food or anything. There's, hostile. And so they were getting very hungry. He said we were over 3 days they hadn't ate. And they come over a hill and they could smell food cooking. And here it was another concentration camp. So he never told me that he give up or they went. But anyway, they got somehow, either they gave up and then went through the chow line. And here it was one of the guys that was serving food. One of the prisoners says, "Where are you from?" And he says, "Well, I'm from Coon, Iowa." And the guy serving says, "Well, I'm from Elberly, Minnesota." Here was Bob Ashpole. He had gotten captured, and he was from Elberly, Minnesota. And I always thought that was kind of neat that here he would run into a guy from Elberly. And he came to Elberly in 1959.
Have you gone to Korea on a revisit program?
No. But one of my uncles did for the Second World War. He went to, God, I forgot the name where he went, but my uncle did get to go. The one who was on the battleship, or the aircraft carrier, Bunker Hill.
How has military service affected your feelings towards war and military service?
I'm against the wars. I think that our president should do as much as they can to try and work something out. I mean, we've been 65 years since Korea, and we've had soldiers there and everything in South Korea, but we haven't had to fight them again, so I think you should always try and try everything you can to have peace instead of war. One interesting thing is that I think that the Vietnam War was a lot different than Korean War. I think maybe the Vietnam War was worse than ours. And the guys that are now fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq and those places, one thing I think about them is that there's no safe place for them to go. I don't think soldiers should have to do more than 13 months, 12 months, 13 months of duty. I think Afghanistan and Iraq and those places, they were letting these guys, or they changed them to 18 months. And then they were doing 2 and 3 and 4 times. And I just wonder if your brain can really take that and that much stress on you. And when we go behind the lines, we were always safe in Korea. And these guys, they go behind the line and they're still have to worry about IDs and all these things. So I think they had it. The other wars have had it worse than us in Korea, but we lost a lot of good men too. So.